I really love the setting of the Horus Heresy, but I just can't choose a single legion to paint. Fortunately, I have been commissioned to paint several different Heresy era characters. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Exalted Wargamer. My name is Stan, and today I'm going to show you how I paint Ahzek Ahriman for the Thousand Suns in that iconic candy red power armor. And don't worry, I'll be making tutorials for the other heroes as well. I just decided to start with the Ahriman. Or to be more precise, you decided. I run a poll on my YouTube community tab and on Instagram, and you chose the order in which I'll make these tutorials. So yeah, I hope you enjoy this one. But before we continue, please go through all the YouTube things. Like, share and subscribe. It really helps the channel to grow and motivates me to work harder. So, you can get more videos just like this. Now, without further ado, let's get painting. As always, I started by priming the miniature black, using my Harder and Steenbeck Infinity CR Plus airbrush and Vallejo black primer at about 30 psi. Apply a couple of thin coats and let them dry in between. You know the drill. As the armor is the largest part of Space Marine, let's paint it with the airbrush as well to speed things up. First, we need to establish a preshade to make the armor really pop. Normally, preshading is done with white over black, but because we're aiming for that iconic candy red Thousand Suns armor, we need to use metallics instead. I started by spraying a dark metallic color. Even though it's the dark metal, it's still fairly bright, because I want the armor to be punchy. I tried to cover mainly the armor areas, to make the later stages easier. Ideally, this miniature would be painted in sub-assembly, but mine was already built, so I had no choice. But don't stress too much about overspray, we will fix it later. And once the metallic base coat was established, I switched to a brighter metal and sprayed it on the most prominent areas such as shoulder pads, helmet and backpack. This creates a really nice light sketch on the armor. Now comes the most exciting part, the candy red glaze. And here we will use the speed paints. Because speed paints are semi-transparent, they'll tint the metallic preshade while keeping it shiny. I chose the brightest red speed paint I had and diluted it well. Then applied it with an airbrush in several thin semi-transparent layers. At first it may look a bit too orange, but don't panic. If you apply too much paint too quickly, you'll get blotches and lose the metallic shine. Instead, build up the red slowly and carefully until you get that rich glossy candy red. And to deepen the shadows, I applied a few extra layers on the lower facing areas, and yeah, it already looks great. Now we can switch to the regular brush. First, I added extreme highlights to the armor. For this, I actually used the original metallic color. The key here is patience. Apply it only on the most prominent edges. Avoid long, thick highlights on large surfaces like arms and legs, or you'll ruin the candy armor effect. I lightly touch edges of the backpack, rivets, elbow guards and sabatons. You can think of this not just as light reflection, but also as wear and tear, revealing raw ceramite beneath the paint. This step is optional if you want to save time, but in my opinion, it adds a ton of visual interest. Next, it's time to paint the details, starting with the white elements. Ahriman has quite a lot of them, so I used two different white recipes. A warm cream white for soft materials like the cape, tabard and scrolls, and a cold silver white for hard ceramite surfaces like the mask, rosary and shoulder icons. And you can absolutely use just one white if you're short on time, but since this is a hero miniature, I'm happy to spend a bit more effort. And for the warm white, I started with the cork base coat on the inner cape, tabard and scrolls. This paint isn't very opaque, so you need around 5 to 6 thin layers, and Don't rush, you need some patience for the smooth result. But remember, you can always reduce the layer drying time by using the hair dryer. Next, I built the highlights with a brighter cream color, focusing on upper facing folds of the cape and tabard. I softened transitions with the scratches and light glazes, and avoided painting over the decorative trim. But if you make mistake, just fix them with the base color. Finally, I applied the brightest cream white as an extreme highlight on the edges and folds, but also adding small random scratches and dots here and there to recreate fabric texture. And as an optional step, I painted thin horizontal lines on the scrolls with dark grey or brown to simulate the text. Nice and easy. And while working on fabric, I painted the outer side of the cape black, along with the staff handle, rubber armor joints, holster and the edge of the tabard. Black is way easier to apply than a cream color. You need just a couple of thin coats for the solid coverage. I then highlighted with a dark greenish grey. This color contrasts beautifully with the candy red armor plates and is much more interesting than just a plain grey. And after I finished sketching the highlights, I softened them a bit with some scratches and glazes. So for extreme highlights I used a neutral basalt grey, applied sparingly to hard edges, rivets and joints. And on the cape I felt that highlights were a bit too strong, so I decided to tone them down a bit with the glazes of a previous color. And that's it. Now for the cold white ceramite details. Even though we want a cold finish, I started with a reddish grey base. In my opinion, it adds a lot of interest and life to the shadows, and we will achieve the cold hue through the later highlights. The process here is quite straightforward. I highlighted with the warm grey on the upper areas, leaving the reddish tone in the recesses. Finally, I added a sharp extreme highlights with the cold silver grey on edges and rivets. Looks quite nice. Next, let's return to metallic paints, as we need to paint all the golden trims and details. The process here is really simple. I painted all the gold trims with the rusty gold and used gunmetal for the blade and few other metal details. Next, we need to add some shadows to the metals. For this I chose Grimdark Shadow by the Army Painter. It's quite a unique rich brownish green paint that contrasts nicely with the red armor. I applied this wash over all the metal elements, pushing it into the recesses while avoiding overflooding. And also I decided to add some shade for our red armor plates in the deepest recesses, but try to be as precise as possible here. Candy red is extremely hard to fix. After the washes were completely dry, I highlighted the metals with the brighter colors. Nice and easy. Finally, we need to paint some blue elements, such as gems, lenses and runes. First, I base coated these areas with a dark blue. Then, I started building the highlights by adding lighter blue to the lower right area. Next, I mixed a bit of ivory into the light blue and drew a thin edge highlight on the lower facing edge of gem. Finally, I placed a small dot of pure ivory in the upper left corner to simulate light reflection. And as you can see, I made a bit of mess on the face mask, so I went back with the greys and whites and fixed it. We also need to paint some of these ceramic plates blue, but due to their size and the less reflective nature of the material, I simply highlighted the upper edges, and that's it. The last thing left to do is to paint the base however you like. I decided to go for a fairly simple base. I dry brushed a couple of greys over it and then added some light brown pigments. Now we can apply varnish to seal everything. Here it's very important to use the satin varnish. Personally, I really like matte varnishes, but in this case it would completely ruin the candy red armor effect, so satin is the way to go. That said, I don't like how satin look on the fabric elements. After it dried completely, I applied a couple of thin coats of matte varnish over the cape and tabard with a brush. I also noted that the satin varnish dulled the pigments quite a lot, so I reapplied them. And that's it. Now we are ready for the final review. And here he is. That was my first attempt painting a candy style armor, and I really like how it turned out. I believe this kind of armor would look great across the whole Southern Suns army on the battlefield. It's not too complex, and you can speed up the process quite a bit for your regular troops. Like in Horus Heresy, Marines have way fewer detail than heroes. No large areas of cream or black fabric, less jewelry and few gold trims. In fact, you mostly just need to paint the armor, some metal details and the bolter casing. If you want to speed up things even more, you can try using oil washes instead of regular ones. I find them extremely helpful for the army painting. But what do you think about this paint job? What kind of red armor do you prefer for the Southern Suns? Glossy candy red or regular bright red? Write it down in the comments below. But that's all for today. Thank you for watching and see you soon. Bye.